in 1988, I was in Seoul, Korea. I was there because we were moving hundreds of young people there to do outreach during the Olympics. And I had to be there for months in advance and fly in and out a lot. And I noticed this campaign started in Seoul about 6 months before the Olympics. They encouraged all restaurant owners to stop serving dog. Yeah. And they complied, I think, mostly. The bulgogi, Korean barbecue I had didn't seem to change a lot, but you just ate and didn't think about it. I learned that traveling around the world. You don't ask, just eat, trust God. And they did, but they were kind of surprised that would bother us, that would bother people in the world, because they raised dogs in packs, and that was just a source of nutrition for them. And we think, that's gross, that's repulsive. You don't eat dogs, they're your pets, they're members of your family. Of course, a person in India, a Hindu, would be just as offended watching you eat a hamburger. Because that could be one of their relatives. A person in Islamic culture or Jewish person would be offended when you eat your pork. See? And the whole point is all of these are cultural perspectives. And each one is relative to that culture. And it's led to this theory among a lot of people that there is no right way to view anything. That every individual and every culture over time develops their ways of seeing things. In his book, How Should We Then Live?, Louis Poyman states, morality is a set of common rules, habits, and customs that have social approval over time, so that they seem part of the nature of things as facts. There's nothing mysterious or transcendent. That's key. Transcendent means above, higher than man. There's nothing transcendent about these codes of behavior. They're just outcomes of social history. So over time, things begin to be accepted in a culture. They get inculcated into that culture, and that's just why we do things, why we believe, because that's what everybody accepts. That's kind of the rules that we live by. And sometimes they are codified in law. Poyman believes that all truth is subjective. Now, you understand what I mean by that? He's writing to say all of us take truth and we see it through our eyes. The popular phrase today is my truth. Everything's about my truth. And we're going to talk about that. No person can judge another person based on what they eat or how they live their life. And the idea is a society will be better if we just stop judging people and everybody just lives their own way. On paper, it seems ideal. Ernest Hemingway, the writer who was a relativist, said this. He said, about morals, I only know that what is moral is what I feel good after. What is immoral is what I feel bad after. So who's the final authority there? Him. And not just him, but his feelings, what he feels about this. We're going to talk about the impact of that. So beyond our ideas about food, are there greater universal moral principles that are valid for all people at all times in every culture? Or should everyone just live by their own truth? That is a big debate today. And the sad thing is, I shouldn't say it's a big debate. It's not being debated. Even though everybody has ideas about it, we're afraid to debate it. How we view morality and truth is relative, whether it's relative to the individual, to the situation, or to all of society, is really important. Is there absolute, objective, moral truth, or is it just subject to the individual and the culture? That's what it comes down to. And this is having a profound effect on society. Let me show you an example of relativism. In 1992, Justice Anthony Kennedy, the Supreme Court Justice, wrote a decision upholding Roe v. Wade, or abortion rights. And he said this: "At the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence, of the universe, and of the mystery of human life." In other words, human life's a mystery. Who knows when it starts? Who can say? And so as a result, we uphold these kind of laws because they favor individual rights versus what's good for somebody, the right holder, like the unborn child. This matters too because it's very prevalent in our society. A 2020 survey was done, and 75% of Americans identified as moral relativists. Think about that. They agreed that identifying moral truth is up to each individual, and there are no moral absolutes that apply to everyone all the time. Yet, 58% of those people, now this is 3 out of 4 Americans. Now think about how many people say they go to church and believe the Bible, but yet they're moral relativists. Now, 58% of those people, when asked, let me read it here. If someone commits murder, should they get the death penalty? And they said yes. Why? Because we believe that murder is wrong. That's a moral absolute. See? And this is the confusion. Only 6% of people in the survey believed that there was moral absolutes. And this is just where a lot of the confusion is, because we're not talking about the philosophies that guide our decisions and our views here. So what people have is this crazy mixed up view of all kinds of things in their head, but they don't understand the truth. Why don't more people, especially Christians, claim to be moral absolutes? Why don't they claim to be moralists instead of relativists? Because if we declare that there is objective or universal, absolute, transcendent truth, then we're considered intolerant, bigoted, narrow-minded, non-progressive, out of touch, haters. Right? And so what do? We just pull back. I've watched a word transition in our culture over the last 20 years. It's been fascinating to watch it. The word tolerance. Tolerance means to get along with somebody that you disagree with. But tolerance has actually changed in its meaning in our culture today. Tolerance now means not disagreeing with anyone, which is ironic because we have to disagree for me to tolerate you. Do you get the point? I mean, if there's no difference, there's no sense of tolerance. I'm not going to argue with you about puppies being cute. Well, we'll just have to agree to disagree. No, we both think puppies are cute, and pizza's good, and so on. It's when you have a disagreement with someone, but you still choose to love them and relate to them and talk to them, even though you view things differently. Today, that's not acceptable. You have to agree with my truth, and it has to be the truth, or we can't relate to one another. There's an emerging emphasis in our culture, too, on the individual over society. This is a fascinating trend, and it is creating so many problems in our world because we've been a culture that has been based, almost every culture is based on the society, what's good for the society. But today, we've put such emphasis on the individual. And the shift is happening so fast, there's not even discussions about the ramifications because decisions have to be made. And when the individual's rights is the most important thing, snap decisions are made. Can I give you a real example? Controversy over Leah Thomas. who just won the women's NCAA swimming competition. And there's little Miss Leah on the left. Here, the individual rights of someone to define their gender has replaced thousands of years of common understanding in human history. 10 years ago, this would not even been a consideration. But we are changing so fast as a culture that we're just shifting things, and nobody's talking about it. I find it interesting, for example, that feminists, and I tend to be feminist, by the way. I believe that women should have every right a man does, and so on. Equal opportunities, equal pay, and so on. I find it interesting that feminists who fought for women's rights, and especially things like Title IX, that gave women the same opportunities in sports and for scholarships as it did men, they're strangely quiet on this whole issue. You don't hear any feminist voices coming out because they don't know what to do. They want to be seen as supporting individual rights, but I don't think anybody foresaw in 1972 when Title IX was passed, exactly 50 years ago, that this is the way they'd celebrate it. When a 6'1" man who's taken a few shots and identifies as a woman jumps in the pool to compete. As one person put it recently, there has never been a better time to be a woman, especially if you're a man. I'm trying to be light about this too, because it's so overwhelming when you see the shift. And Leah Thomas may be a great person. I've never met him, her, and I pray that whatever's going on in his or her life, he finds Jesus. She finds Jesus. Because that's far more important. Our identity by gender and everything else is not near as important as our identity as a child of God. For the last 250 years, our nation has benefited from a generally accepted basis of truth, of what we call Judeo-Christian values based on the Bible. And all of that is being turned upside down at an ever-increasing pace. So how do we approach relativism, or in a world where everybody has their truth? I think we have three options. Number one, we can embrace it. We can just accept it. And a lot of people do. Alistair McIntyre wrote, "To whatever degree it is intentional, however, the phrase 'I feel that' has frequently replaced phrases like 'I think that,' 'I believe that,' or 'I would argue that.' A shift in language use that expresses an essentially subjectivistic and emotivistic approach to moral reasoning and rational argument." What in the world are they saying there? Here's the point. We've moved away from sharing our thoughts. Hey, I just think this, I believe this, this is, the way I see it. But what's happening today is our thoughts are attached to subjectivity, he describes here, and emotions. So when I share my truth with you, I'm not just sharing an idea, I'm sharing myself. And it could be like what you like on hot dogs. It doesn't matter. But if I share my truth with you and you reject it, then you're rejecting me. Do you get that? When my truth has emotions assigned to it, now all of a sudden, every conversation becomes emotional. Between defending our rights and having our truth, people live in this defensive posture, guarding themselves against any attack. See? People on the left and the right both believe their rights are being taken away and their truth is not being what everybody should live by. So people are constantly carrying this weight all the time now. And this is why we see the conflict going on. Why people are just reacting. Why are people in traffic crazy? Why people are just going off on other people. It's because they are so scared and defensive. Like I said, this is a rapid shift in our culture. So what a lot of people do is just, let's embrace it. Let's just, everybody have their truth and we'll just work it all out. But it doesn't work out. Now the second option is to avoid or just ignore it so we don't risk any conflict. Right? And we all do it, don't we? I mean, didn't we learn that over the last 2 years about masks and vaccines? You could say something casual, but if you caught somebody on the wrong day with the wrong view or different view than you, man, it was like you stepped on a landmine. And now something or someone's getting blown up. Because we have emotions tied to it. And our truth is behind that. And so we don't even talk about things. We keep things on a surface level, just news, weather, and sports. And even that we have to be careful about. Differences, this is Christian Smith's, what he wrote in Lost in Transition, good book. He says, differences in viewpoints and ways of life, including religious ones, are mostly acknowledged, respected, and then set aside as incommensurate and off limits for evaluation. In other words, oh, you're a Christian. Okay, we will never discuss that again. Oh, you believe in this? Okay, we will never discuss it. Because if we do, there could be conflict. See? So even in our colleges today, I saw a thing a few weeks ago where at Yale University, they had a panel of people, liberal and conservative. And in this case, when the conservative person stood up to speak, they were shouted down. And the president of the university came out and said, or a head of the law school there said, this is crazy. You're acting like babies. You can't listen to another idea that's different than yours? And yet, that same department head oversees a whole group of professors that have shaped the minds of these kids. If the third option, if we say that there is absolute or objective truth, we have to stand for it. And we start by affirming and committing to the value that there is absolute truth that God has given us in His Word, the Bible. See. Without truth in society, without there being a transcendent truth in society, and let me share this with you. I was thinking about this last week, and I heard somebody else say something like it, and I've really been trying to sense, is this accurate? But I believe it's true. We are the first culture in history, the first one in history, of all the cultures of all of human history, to not have a transcendent moral authority as the basis for our government and lives. We're the first one ever. The French came close to it during the French Revolution. And so this is a grand experiment where there is no solid basis of truth that we can appeal to. Nothing higher than ourselves. And so we're furiously writing laws, to try to help and how this happens and this variation and so on, instead of just saying, this is wrong. Why? Because this is what we've adopted from our understanding of God and what's morally right and wrong. Without truth in society, the Bible's accurate when it describes a people rebelling against God. 7 times in the book of Judges it says this: everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And we saw, as a result, if you read the book of Judges, you see this cycle of God rescuing the people, showing grace to them, and them rebelling, and then the chaos and the idolatry and the failure and ultimately the collapse of that culture until God mercifully comes in and raises up another leader or judge to help them. And understand more why they were called judges now. Because you need someone to say, this is right and this is wrong. This is not new. This goes all the way back to the garden. The root of relativism is man wanting to be his own God, control his own life and his own destiny. Right there in that place where you're deciding whether or not you're going to follow God or do your own thing, the devil is whispering to you exactly what he said to Eve in Genesis 3:1. Did God really say, you must not eat of the fruit from any trees in the garden? Well, we know it was just one tree, but Satan twists a little bit. Come on, Eve. You deserve wisdom. You deserve the best. You know what's best for you. That's what he's saying. And in verse 6, it says, the woman was convinced. She saw that the tree was beautiful and the fruit looked delicious, and she wanted the wisdom it would give her. She was already in the highest position that she could be as a daughter of God. And he was providing to them every bit of wisdom and grace that they needed to live an amazing life. But that human heart hungers for more. That selfishness inside us drives us to want what we want. In the past, we were taught, never deny God. Today, the mantra is, never deny yourself. Relativism keeps people enslaved to Satan's deception, lying to them, getting them to believe that they're free thinkers in their own person and in charge of their own destiny. Paul says this in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 10. He said, he, speaking of Satan here, he will use every kind of evil deception to fool those on their way to destruction because they refuse to love and accept the truth that would save them. How clear is that? This is the enemy's work in the lives of people who choose to reject God, or not just reject Him, but maybe in the church, neglect Him. And as a result, we are more easily manipulated. It goes on a couple verses later to say this. Then they will be condemned for enjoying evil. Notice that, enjoying evil rather than believing the truth. Okay? This is why Jesus was so clear and so explicit when He told His disciples, His followers, in John 8. He said, Jesus said to the people who believe in me, you are truly my disciples if you remain faithful to my teachings. That is what makes a disciple. Not just somebody who's prayed a prayer once or who got baptized as a child or something else. But if you remain faithful to my teachings, then if you're faithful to God's teaching, that's where freedom comes from. So Jesus is telling us. See, we don't even realize how much this impacts our thinking, how much we're influenced by the thinking of this world, by the society in which we're a part of. And this is why the Word of God helps purify that. It helps set up a standard and go, wait a minute, I've been thinking wrong. If this is what the Bible says and I'm thinking this way, I've got to choose God's way. We think sometimes that we're thinking clearly when in effect, we're really just thinking about our own comfort and security. This is what Peter had in mind in Matthew 16 when Jesus challenged him. Jesus turned to Peter and said, "Get out of my way, you Satan." That's never a good thing for Jesus to say to you. You are a hindrance to me because your thoughts, look at what he says, your thoughts are only filled with what? Man's viewpoints and not the ways of God. What made Peter, Jesus' chief disciple, the eventual leader of the church, what made him a puppet of Satan? Just believing man's viewpoints, thinking of himself. What would cause him comfort and safety? What would fulfill that dream of sitting next to Jesus when he overcame Rome and reigned in power? We're all driven toward comfort and safety. It's one of the most base things in human life. But at times, the greater choice is something that will make us uncomfortable. But we're doing it in obedience to God. That's why Jesus says in the very next verse, then Jesus said to his disciples, if you truly want to follow me, you should at once completely reject and disown your own life. I kind of like my life. I like my comfort. I like my security. I like what I have. I don't always want to give that up. This also includes abandoning your truth for God's. He said, and you must be willing to share my cross and experience it as your own as you continually surrender to my ways. I mean, how clear is this choice? And it's a choice that we make again and again and again throughout our day. It's not what I think, I feel. It is thy will be done. As we're leading up in Lent to this time of honoring Jesus' sacrifice on the cross, His laying down His life for us, and Him asking us to do that in return is a small price for us to pay compared to what Jesus paid, and the reward is eternity in a better world and a better life until we get there. This is the idea that I'm concerned that our society is losing. We're losing these transcendent, godly values. And I know I sound like some old guy on a stump preaching. It's just, sorry, but it's truth. I'd rather just preach. We're going to go into a series on Mark right after Easter. I can't wait. It's just the Bible. But here's the problem. I feel like I can preach the Bible over and over to you, and that part of your brain says, oh yeah, we believe that. Yes, that's good. Oh, that's good knowledge. And we tuck it away, but then we go out and live our own subjective truth life, my truth. And we live for my stuff and my views and my things and just my life. And the two, somehow, we've reconciled them in our head to somehow both be there, even though they're completely opposed. So we spend a lot of our times going back and forth. Am I doing this for me or for God? Me or for God? Well, take me out of the equation. It should always be for God. And that's the challenge, isn't it? We live in a world that's saying it's about you. But we follow a God that says it's about Him. A society without values quickly becomes a society without value. And that, I'm concerned, is the direction we're heading. We have to be a people who are willing to love others, but engage them in the truth. We have to be willing that some people are going to reject us because our truth is very narrow. Truth is one idea, not a whole bunch of options. It's very narrow. You are going to be narrow-minded if you are a follower of Jesus. But that's okay. I would rather have a focused mind and know what I'm thinking and be able to move toward that and say, this is what I base my decision on. What I believe is the heart of God. And sometimes that decision affects me more than it does other people. It means my surrender, my sacrifice, my humility before God. Rather than embracing the ideas of this world, this philosophy of relativism. Like I said, this is the basis, and I hope you can see today how this is the basis underneath so much of our thought today. We can either embrace it, We can avoid it, and I think that, unfortunately, is the route the church has taken. We're in such shock every day when we see the world moving farther and farther away from God and the values that we were raised in. And we don't know what to do, so we just sit silent. Or we can stand for God's truth. And that doesn't mean being militant and mean to people. It means loving people well. Jesus was amazing at loving people. But the crowd that cheered him on Sunday crucified him on Friday. There's going to be more and more of a cost to follow Jesus in the days ahead. There really will be. I remember my son went to college, and I asked him after a couple weeks, how's your devotional life? He goes, it's actually easier to live for God here. I go, why? He goes, well, here, if you're going to be a Christian, you better be all out. You can't compromise. You can have a little Christianity here. Those people don't make it. Because it's not woven into who they are. They have their parents' values, but it's like the couple that were in the car and music's playing, the heat's on, it's dark, him and her. And he says, would you like to get in the back seat? She says, no, I'll stay up here with you. No, he goes, no, it's not what I had in mind. But at that moment, her response might be, well, my parents have taught me. He says, honey, your parents aren't here. But yet in church, I've been taught, honey, we ain't in church. And that conviction better be her own at that point. Or pressure and the influence and the desires and all that are going to overwhelm the truth of God that's not been firmly established as her own. And every day, you are being confronted with that, and you will be more and more. And I want us to be a people that are aware of the challenge, equipped for the challenge, but never lose how we lead with love. That young person that's out there spouting their truth, and tomorrow they may believe something else, but they're militant about it, They're just trying to find out who they are. And what if they could discover that they're a child of God? What if their identity could be that God really loves them and wants to father them and lead them into a destiny that He's designed them for? See, that's the good news that people need to hear. I've never met a young person, no matter how far they are from God, who weren't stopped in their tracks with the word, I really see something on your life. I think there's really something great inside of you. I just sense it when I see you. But, to discover what that is, you would have to go back to who created you and how He designed you and what they created you for. And once you start walking with that entity, that God, they can show you what kind of life you can have, unless you like the one you have. It's those kind of seeds of truth that I believe changes the world. The other thing I think changes the world is just the operation of the miraculous. People can talk about truth, but it's theory. When they come face to face with a God who is real, through a miracle or a prophetic word or something that opens their heart to God, that awakens them to the reality of God, that can be just as transformative. So that's my challenge today. I want to wake up every day and declare, God, I surrender my rights to you. My time is in your hands. I surrender my stuff to you. Help me live secure and generous and trust and obey you. And please reveal more of your truth that will set me free. I don't want it to be about me. I want it to be about Jesus more and more.